everyone ready?
Hello everybody, thank you so much for joining us here today. I am so excited and thrilled and honoured to be part of this event with BookTrust Represents. I understand there are more than 500 schools taking part in this today. That is amazing. So if you're one of them, thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute honour to be talking to you today. My name is SF Saeed. I am the author of a number of books I will be talking to you about today. Here's one of them, Varjack Paw. Has anybody out there had a chance to read Varjack Paw? If you haven't yet read Varjack Paw, I think you can guess from the cover, it is a story about a cat. But what you may not be able to guess straight away is it's a story about a cat who does martial arts. Varjack is a cat who dreams of becoming a great warrior, and in his dreams he learns a secret martial art that is known only to cats. I did write another book about him. This one is called The Outlaw Varjack Paw. Has anybody out there had a chance to read this one? If you haven't yet read The Outlaw Varjack Paw, I think you can tell he's still a cat. He is still doing his martial arts, but his dreams of becoming a great warrior have got him in quite big trouble because in this book he gets declared an outlaw and he is wanted dead or alive. The next book I wrote was called Phoenix. Anyone had a chance to read this one? If you haven't, you can probably tell from the cover there are no cats in this book. This one is about humans and also aliens. Phoenix is a great big space epic set across an entire galaxy. And the main characters in this story are a human boy and an alien girl who have to save the galaxy, of course. And finally, my new book, Tyger. Has anybody had a chance to read this one yet? If you have not yet read Tyger, I think you can tell from the cover I am back with the cats, but this one is a much bigger cat. Now, I will be telling you more about all those books in a moment and how I came to write them. But first of all, I would love to tell you about some books that I didn't write. I want to go all the way back to my very first memory of all, my first memory ever. My first memory is actually a memory of a book. I was about 3 years old and my uncle was reading me this book. Some of you guys might know it. Has anybody out there come across The Cat in the Hat by Dr. Seuss? So I was 3 years old and my uncle read me this story and I just thought The Cat in the Hat is brilliant. I want him to come to my house and smash everything to bits. It would be the nicest thing ever if the Cat in the Hat would visit me today. And I think I knew at that moment I was always going to love books. I was always going to love stories because it seemed like anything that you could imagine was allowed if it was in a book. Absolutely anything at all. An amazing idea. I want to tell you about another book. This one, I would say, totally changed my life. This book I encountered when I was at primary school. My mum came to me one day. She said, I've just read this. I think it's the best book ever. You have to read it. And she handed me this enormous 500-page long book. Well, she must have seen the look of panic on my face because she immediately said, it's okay, don't worry. If you don't like it, you do not have to read the whole thing. But please, give it a go. Try page 1. See what happens. All right, I said. I open up the book. I begin to read. And from that very first page, I couldn't stop. So this is the book. It's called Watership Down by a writer called Richard Adams. It's an amazing epic story about rabbits trying to survive in the wild. Now, I grew up in a big city. I grew up in London. So I don't think I'd even seen a rabbit in real life at that time. I certainly wasn't all that interested in rabbits. So when my mum presented me with a 500-page long book with a picture of a rabbit on the front, I had my doubts. But as I opened it up and began to read, I really couldn't stop. Because it turned out the lives of these rabbits were so much more interesting than I could possibly have imagined. They were just rabbits. They were ordinary little rabbits. Everything else out there seemed to be bigger than them, stronger than them. And it was all coming to get them. Everything in the world seemed to be coming to try and get these rabbits. And just to survive in that incredibly dark and dangerous world, they had to be so brave. They had to be so brilliant and resourceful. I remember reading the book thinking, how are they going to do this? How are they going to live? And as I read that book, I thought to myself, well, all right, my mum was right. This really is the best book ever. And one day, I would like to try and write something that is even half as good as this book. I think that would be an incredible thing to do with my life. And I genuinely believe my life changed forever at that moment. That is what I've been trying to do ever since. I had a very similar feeling around the same time in a movie. I think movies can change your life just as much as books can. So can TV, comics, manga. All of these are great storytelling forms. And in the end, I think it is the stories more than anything that really change our lives. So this movie definitely changed mine. Perhaps it has changed yours. It went on to be massively popular and successful, was seen all around the world, and there have been loads and loads of sequels and spin-offs. Has anybody out there ever seen a Star Wars film? I'm sure most of you have. If you haven't, I'm sure you have heard of Star Wars at least. Everybody in the universe has heard of Star Wars now, but if you were to get a time machine, go back to the year 1977, when I was 10 years old, you would discover nobody had ever heard of Star Wars, because that is the year the very first one of all was released. They now call that film Episode 4, by the way. Don't be fooled. There were no episodes before it. It really was the first. It was just called Star Wars back then. I remember going to see it with my friends. We really didn't know what was coming. The lights go down in a cinema, the music begins, and then that first starship appears on the screen. This huge, huge ship that just keeps going and going. So big our seats begin to shake, it is that loud. I remember just looking up at that ship and thinking, yes, one day I want to make stuff like this. I want to make a story like Star Wars. That is so big it could fill an entire galaxy. I want to make a story like Watership Down that people will not be able to stop reading. Or The Cat in the Hat, a story people will remember all their lives. Stories, they are probably my favourite things in the world, and those are a few of my favourite stories. I would love it if you could all think about what your favourite stories are. Maybe just write down, what do you love to read? What are your favourite stories of all time? If you haven't yet found a favourite, by the way, keep reading. It could just be the book you open next. But whatever your favourite is, whatever you love to read, the way you feel about that is exactly the same as the way I felt about things like Watership Down, Star Wars. Writers are really nothing more than readers who take one more step and start to write stories themselves. That's all I am. I'm just a reader who decided this was it. This was what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to dedicate my life to trying to make stuff like that. I only had one tiny problem. Absolutely no idea how to do it. We never had events like this when I was at school. We never had authors coming into the classroom and talking to us about their work. No one in my family had ever written a book, made a movie. My family is originally from the Middle East and the wider Muslim world. I'm a Muslim myself. I came to live in Britain when I was 2 years old with my mum. So there are people in my family for whom just speaking English is really quite challenging. And so to them, the idea that I could get a real book actually published, that seemed very unlikely. But I thought, well, how hard can it be? The writer probably thinks up the best idea that they can. They write the story from the beginning to the end. They reach the end one day and they get to write the words "the end," very excitingly. And that is it, the book is done. So the first time that I tried to write a book, that's what I did. I thought up the best idea I could. I worked on it every day, from the beginning to the end. I reached the end of that story after about 2 months. I remember thinking, oh, that's pretty good. I've written a book in 2 months. Great, okay. I'm going to send this out to some publishers now. They will surely clamour for my signature. I'm going to be rich and famous. Here we go. I send out the book. Every single publisher I send it to gives me the same answer. They all say, no. No, we do not want to publish your book. This wasn't just 1 or 2 rejections, I'm sorry to tell you. It wasn't 3 or 4. It was 40. 40 times I sent out my book, and 40 times it came back, no. Well, I thought to myself, what can I learn from this? I think I can learn that publishers are stupid. Obviously, those people have no idea what they're doing. Never mind, I'm just going to write another book. It will be even better. Here we go. So the second time that I tried to write a book, I gave it everything. I worked all day, all night. At the end of only 1 month, I reached the end of that story. I remember writing the words, "the end" again, and I thought, yes, I've done it again. I'm going to send it out. They will surely publish this one. Maybe they'll apologize about the first one and publish that too. Exactly the same thing happened again. Another 40 rejections. And as I was now up to 80 in total, 80 times I had sent books out, and 80 times they had come back no, I was beginning to despair. I was beginning to feel quite demoralized and depressed. And people who cared about me, like my family, my friends, they were getting quite worried about me because they could see the effect it was having. Can you imagine being told no 80 times in a row? It was terrible. And sometimes they would just come up to me quietly and say, look, it's all right, we like your stories, we think they're good, but maybe this idea you have, that you can get real books published, maybe that really isn't realistic. Maybe you should forget about that. Do something else. You'll be a lot happier. Maybe, I thought, but there isn't anything else I want to do. This is it. This is my big dream. I can't give up. I must persevere. I must keep going. It was also around this time an amazing new wave of books began to appear in the world. Books like Philip Pullman's Northern Lights and The Subtle Knife, Mallory Blackman's Noughts and Crosses. Amazing, wonderful books that made me feel I must keep going. I want to write books like that. But maybe it isn't the publishers who are being stupid. Maybe it's me. Maybe I should do some research, find out how do writers like this actually do it. And so I finally did what I should have obviously done in the first place. I did research. I tracked down interviews with writers that I admired, filmmakers that I respected, people like George Lucas, the guy who made Star Wars. Very interesting. All these people, when they talked about writing, one word came up every single time. Not a word I expected, not a word I'd even really come across before, but a life-changing word. The word was drafts. Sometimes, they said, it could take you a number of drafts until you make your story absolutely brilliant. Now, I hadn't really come across that idea before. I wish somebody had talked to me about it a little bit before I started. That would have saved me quite a bit of pain, but for anyone there who has not yet come across the idea, here it is. Really, really simple, yet really, really powerful. The first time that you write something, whatever it is, it'll probably have really good things in it, but if you don't treat that as a finished book, you just treat it as a first draft, then put your first draft away. Forget all about it. Go and read loads of other books. Then come back and read yours, but pretend you didn't write it. Pretend somebody else wrote it. Actually, go all the way. Pretend it's a book you paid money to read. You've just saved up £10.99 and you've handed it over to read this. That will make things really clear. Because I think every time you do that, every time you buy a book with your own money, that is not a small thing, is it? It's a really important thing. And I think what you are secretly hoping every time is that this one could be the best one you have ever read. This could be your new favourite book. This one could be as good as Watership Down or Star Wars, whatever your favourite is. And if the thing you are reading is not as good as that, you have to go through it again. Do a second draft. And again, as many times as it takes, until the thing you're reading is so absolutely brilliant, you really cannot see any way it could possibly be better. Oh, I thought to myself as I read all these interviews saying the same thing. Okay, well, that is not what I've been doing so far, is it? No. But if this is the truth, if this is how George Lucas made Star Wars, okay, I will give this a go. Next time I have an idea, I am going to try this drafts thing. Sounds like a lot of work, but what do I have to lose? Now, it was about this time something completely different happened in my life. A very ordinary, everyday event. I'm sure this has happened to lots of you. We got ourselves a new pet. We got ourselves a little kitten, in fact. Now this kitten, he was really young when we first met him. He was only a few weeks old. He was so small, he could actually sit in the palm of your hand. He had never, ever been outside in his whole life. Very innocent little cat. I will never forget the first time he went outside, because it was really dramatic. He goes out into our garden, and at the bottom of the garden, there was a high wall, 100 times bigger than he was. But before anybody could stop him, this tiny kitten goes right up to the wall, coils up like a spring, and then explodes and runs all the way up the wall till he's sitting on the top. You could see him there with his eyes enormous, his ears sticking out, his whiskers trembling in the wind, because he could see the whole world for the first time ever. I just thought, that is incredible. A cat goes out into the world for the first time ever. What is going to happen out there? I am sure many of you have begun to suspect this is where Varjack Paw began. Began with me looking at my own cat, something absolutely anybody could do. I remember sitting down to write the story. I worked on it every day from the beginning to the end. And I reached the end after about 2 months again. But this time, crucially, instead of thinking, oh, that's amazing, I wrote a whole book and it only took 2 months, I thought, that's not a whole book, is it? That's only a first draft. That is all I've done. Put the first draft away. I went off and read loads of other books. And then I came back to read mine. And when I did, I thought, now remember, I didn't write this. Somebody else wrote this. And actually, I've just paid £10.99 to read it. I open it up, very confident. It was terrible. It was so bad. Oh no, I thought, what is this? This isn't a real book. If I had paid money for this book, I would want my money back. I'd actually complain. I'd go back to the bookshop. I'm sorry, I'd say. I think this writer had a good idea. The cat climbing the wall, that's exciting. But I want exciting stuff on every single page of a book. Where is all of that? Sometimes I want spooky, strange, mysterious things in a book. Things that might make me think a little bit. Where's all of that? Sometimes I want silly, funny things in a book so I can have a bit of a laugh. Where's all of that? This writer should have done more. The moment I thought that, I didn't have a choice, did I? I was the writer. I had to get to work. I went all the way through the story of Varjak Paw, just trying to find any way I could to make it better. And it did get better, but when I read the second draft, I still thought, no, there's no way I would pay money for this. I have to keep going. So I did. I did 3 drafts. 4. It was around the 5th draft of Varjak Paw. The idea of a secret martial art known only to cats began to take shape. This martial art was called the Way of Jalal, and there were 7 skills in the way, skills that would give a cat great power, skills for fighting and for hunting, skills with names like slow time, moving circles, shadow walking. None of that was in the first draft of the book, or the second, really only about the 5th. But I thought this secret martial art was really interesting, and the more I worked on it, the more interesting it was getting. So I kept going. I did 6 drafts, 7, 8. I think it was around the 8th draft of Varjak Paw I met this character for the first time. Her name was Sally Bones. She was the thin white cat with one ice blue eye, boss of the meanest gang of street cats in the city. You definitely didn't want her to be your enemy. And it seemed like Varjak had just made her his enemy, but I thought she was really interesting, Sally Bones. I had to keep going and find out more about her, so I did 9 drafts, 10. When I read the 11th draft of Varjak Paw, I thought to myself, okay, I think I see how this drafts thing works. Is this as good as my favourite stories of all time? Is it as good as Star Wars? Obviously not, but so much better than anything I have ever done before. I am going to take a big risk now. I'm going to send this out to those publishers. Let's see. Maybe everybody in the world is going to reject me again, but if they do, I'm not giving up. I took a deep breath. I sent out my book. Another 10 publishers said no, bringing my lifetime total of rejections to a truly horrifying 90. But then, unbelievably, the 91st publisher said, yes! Yes, he said, I really like this story you have written. A cat going out into the world for the first time ever. What a good idea for a book. I like this so much, he told me. I am going to publish it and you are going to do some more drafts. More drafts, I thought to myself. Thank you, I said out loud. That's amazing. Thank you so much. But, you know, I have actually done 11 drafts already. I've never, ever worked so hard in my whole life. I don't think I can do any more. He said, yes, no, I can see all the hard work you've been doing here. That's the reason I'm saying yes. All I'm telling you is, I think there could be more in your story. I think you can make your story even better if you just do some more drafts. I think I hate this man, I thought to myself. Of course, I didn't say it out loud because he was the only person who had ever said yes. So out loud, I just said, okay, I will do some more drafts then. I took it away. I looked at it again. He was right. There was more. I did 12 drafts, 13. In the end, it's very embarrassing to admit this, but I have to tell you the truth. This book, Varjack Paw, this is actually the 17th draft of the story that I wrote. And in the end, all those drafts, they took about 5 years of my life. Now, if you had told me that at the beginning, if you had said, okay, it's going to happen. You are going to get your book published. It will happen, but you may have to spend 5 years doing 17 drafts of one story. Still want to do it? I don't know what I would have said. Sounds like a lot of work, doesn't it? All I can tell you is, I am so glad that I did it. I'm so glad that I persevered and did not give up. Because when Varjack Paw was finally published, after all those rejections, all those drafts, something amazing started to happen. People began to read it. It won this thing called the Smarties Prize. I always thought the Smarties Prize, that's got to be the best prize you could ever win. First of all, it's the Smarties Prize. I thought if you won that, free lifetime supply of chocolate, obviously. But more importantly, the Smarties Prize was voted for by readers. Every year, up and down the country, thousands of people would vote as to what their favourite book was that year. And the year that Varjack Paw was published, it won the gold medal. Thousands of people had voted for this book. It was unbelievable. I did cry that day, mainly because no free chocolate. Not true, they don't give you any. But there were people coming up to me saying, oh, we really enjoyed your book, but we need to know what happens next. I was already working on The Outlaw. Now this one begins pretty much where the first one ends. So if you have read the first book and you would like to know what happens next, this could be a good book to read next. If you haven't read the first one, you can just start here and it will all make sense. I put a lot of work into just trying to make it a great book that would all stand on its own. This one ended up winning the Blue Peter Book of the Year award. Blue Peter badge. They do give you one. After I finished The Outlaw of Varjack Paw, I wanted to get as far away from that as I possibly could. I wanted to do something totally different. I wanted to write a great big space epic, a story that might be as exciting as a book as I had found Star Wars to be as a movie. And Phoenix was the result of that. So, if you, like me, love Star Wars, maybe give Phoenix a go one day. But all the time I was working on Phoenix, there was this idea in my mind for a book that I felt sure would be my best one yet, if I could just get it right. That book is Tyger. Now, I would just like to read you a little bit from Tyger, just to give you a flavour of the book. I know a lot of you have sent in questions, and I will be answering your questions in approximately 2 minutes' time. But right now, I am just going to read you a little bit from Tyger, just to give you a flavour of the story. Now, Tyger is a story that is set in London in the 21st century, present day, right now, but not in this world. It is set in a strange, alternate world where history has gone very differently. In the world of Tyger, there are almost no animals left. Almost all animals have been hunted to extinction. And yet it is in that world that a boy called Adam and a girl called Zadie encounter the mysterious, mythical, magical animal known as Tyger. And I just want to read you the scene where Adam first meets the tiger. Chapter 2. It was very dark in the ruined building, but as Adam looked up, his whole body shaking, he saw 2 points of light above him. The lights blinked like eyes, and then something erupted out of the darkness, moving so fast he saw only a blur at first. A streak of black and gold, leaping down from the roof beams to land on all 4 paws beside him. An animal, a gigantic animal, stood by his side, growling at the man with a knife. With one huge stride, she put herself between him and Adam. Then she threw back her head and roared, as if protecting Adam from the knife. The man screamed. He ran. He fled through the door he'd come in by and was gone. Adam couldn't run. The animal still stood between him and the door. He could only stand there, staring at her, senses filling with a sweet, high, musky scent like honeysuckle growing wild. In her presence, everything else just melted away, even his fear. His skin was prickling and his eyes were wide, but inside him was a feeling stranger than fear. This animal had come down from the darkness to defend him. Why? And what was she? A flash of lightning revealed more of her form. She was 10 feet long from her whiskers to her tail. So broad she filled the doorway. Her fur was fiery gold with coal-black stripes. Time seemed to stop as she turned to look at Adam, and Adam looked back at her. He could not look away. He'd never been so close to any animal before, let alone one so huge and wild. Her eyes burned like liquid golden fire. They were shining with a light that was different to any light he had ever seen. Yet he thought he saw pain inside them too. And now that she was facing him, he could see she was wounded. There was blood on her fur between her stripes, dripping wet and red. Whatever she was, this animal was wounded. And that is the scene where Adam first sees the tiger. She is wounded. She's in trouble. She might even be dying. But as he comes to see her again, and he brings his friend Zadie to see the tiger too, they begin to realize this is no ordinary tiger. The tiger has powers they can't begin to imagine. And the tiger begins to show them they also have powers. Powers they can gain by going through a series of mysterious doors. And if they can just learn how to use these powers in time, maybe this boy and this girl and this tiger can save the world. I hope you will give it a go. I feel pretty sure that is my best book so far. So happy reading to anybody out there who would like to read one of my books. Now, I think we have a little bit of time for questions, and I have a bowl here full of questions that you have all sent in. So I am going to attempt to answer as many as we have time for. So the first question is from Wolffields Primary School. Hello, Wolffields Primary School. Thank you so much for sending us a question. Your question is, how did your parents react when you wanted to become an author? I have mentioned that for my family, the idea that I could become an author seemed very unlikely. But I would say they were supportive, they just doubted that it could happen. So they always encouraged me to do other things, just in case it didn't happen. And that was a good thing, because for a long time, all those years I was getting rejected by every publisher in the world, I did need to do other things for money, to live, to make a living. So yeah, they were cautious, realistic. When my first book was finally published, Varjak Paw finally became a real book, my family were just so happy. It was amazing. It was very, very moving for me to see. So to anybody out there who perhaps comes from a background where nobody in your family has ever done anything like that, my message to you is, you can do it. You really can. If I can get books published, I honestly believe you can do anything you put your minds to. Persevere, keep going, keep trying to get better any way you can. Learn from anybody who will help you along the way. But if you stick with it, I think you can do absolutely anything. Okay. The next question coming in is from Burnside College. Hello, Burnside College. Your question is, how would you encourage people to read who don't like it? That is a really interesting question. I think people who say that they don't like reading are people who haven't yet found a story or a book that they love. I really do believe there is a book for everybody out there. It could be fiction, a storybook, but it could also be non-fiction. For example, I went through a few years where all I wanted to read was coverage of football matches and my favourite football team. That is reading. I went through a few years where all I wanted to read was comics. That is also reading. I think all reading is reading, and it's all good. So I think whoever you are, whatever you love, whatever you are interested in and enjoy, there are books about that which exist out there, and you can find them, and there are people who will help you to find them. Your teachers, librarians, there are loads of people who will help you to find books that I think will make you a reader. I really do believe every single person can be a reader, and there is a book for you out there. Don't give up. Keep reading. It might just be the one you open next. Okay, our next question is coming from Queensgate School. Thank you, Queensgate School. Really interesting question. Is one of the characters in the book specifically named after someone you know? Very interesting question. It depends which book you mean, so I will answer with reference to a couple of them. Varjack Paw. Now then, I told you that this book was inspired by my own cat's adventures. Can you guess what my own cat's name might have been? He was called Varjak Paw. So yes, I named the character after my own cat, which is obviously a little bit cheeky, but I think if you are the author, you are allowed to put whatever you want in your book. It's your book. You can do what you like. Tyger, I don't think there is a character in Tyger who is named after somebody I know. I do have a cousin called Adam, but Adam isn't really named after Adam. I do know somebody called Zadie, but Zadie isn't really named after Zadie. I don't know anybody called Tyger, but I would love to. So if anybody out there is called Tyger, I think we can say that the book is specially dedicated to you. Okay, what is our next question? John Burns Primary School. Hello, John Burns Primary School. Thank you for your question. It's a really interesting one. Do you ever make mistakes when writing your books? It's a really interesting question. It all depends what you mean by the word mistakes. So I've told you that I do many, many drafts of my books. Varjack Paw, 17 drafts. Tyger ended up taking 19, even more. You would think that as you get more experience as a writer, you might be able to do it quicker. I think I have learned. I think I'm a better writer than I used to be, but I make mistakes all the time. I always get things wrong, many, many times before I get them right. However, I think in the end, there isn't really any such thing as a mistake. There isn't really any such thing as getting it wrong. They're all steps along the way. They're all part of the process of writing. I have now met many, many other authors, and I can tell you, there is not one of us who can write a perfect story in one go. Not possible. Just not possible. Stories are far too complicated. You cannot possibly get everything right first time. We all build our stories over a number of stages, and we call those stages drafts. So yes, all writers make what you might call mistakes, but I prefer to think of them as steps along the way. If I hadn't done the first 16 drafts of Varjack Paw, I could never have written the 17th, the one that you might say is right. If I hadn't done the first 18 drafts of Tyger, I could never have written the final book. And a really interesting thing, often my favourite thing in the book ends up being something that turns up right at the end. If you have read Varjack Paw, you may remember these two black cats who show up at the beginning of the story. Nobody knows who they are or what they're doing. We just know something quite mysterious is going on. These black cats did not exist because I hadn't thought of them yet until the 5th and final year of writing. Were the 4 years before that a mistake? No, because I could never have found the black cats without them. But the story isn't complete without them. And that's why they're my favourite thing. They remind me how important it is to make all those mistakes to get to where you really want to go in the end. So that was a really, really interesting question. Thank you so much for that one. Let us move on and have another one now. This is from West Hill Primary School. Holly is a good friend to Varjack Paw. That's very true, thank you. Are you likely to write a book where she is the main character? What a wonderful question, I love that. So the first thing I would say is when I am writing my books, I do usually go through a process of trying to imagine the story from every single character's point of view, as if they were the main character in the story. So when I was writing Varjack and the Outlaw, I did write things from Holly's point of view, and Tam's, and Cludge's, even Sally Bones's point of view, because I wanted to understand those characters as well as I could, and I found the best way to do that was to write scenes from their point of view. Now for me, that's all I want to do with that. I'm trying to tell the story of Varjack as the main character, so I don't think I will ever publish those things. But if you wanted to read a story in which Holly is the main character, I would be totally honoured and thrilled if you were to write such a story yourselves. I would love that. I think that would be amazing. Some of the first stories I ever wrote were based on things that I loved. I remember writing Star Wars stories, Star Trek stories, placing my friends into them as characters, shifting things around. So I would love it if anybody has read any of my books and wanted to go further and write a story of their own using any of my characters or my worlds. I think that would be brilliant. And I have actually seen fantastic stories written using Varjack Paw, Phoenix, and Tyger already. It's a wonderful thing to see. So if you would like to read a story with Holly as the main character, write one yourself. I would love that. Thank you for that fabulous question. I love it. Okay, what is our next question? Queensgate School. Good afternoon, Queensgate School. How do you come up with the names of your books? Yes, titles. It's actually been different with each book. So Varjack Paw, this was pretty straightforward. Here's the name of my cat. It's the name of the main character. I thought always from the very beginning, it's got to be called Varjack Paw. That's got to be the name of the book. So that one was pretty straightforward. The Outlaw Varjack Paw was not always called The Outlaw Varjack Paw. It went through a number of different titles, some of which were absolutely terrible. But like everything else in writing, if you keep going, you keep trying to make something better, even if your first attempt is terrible, in the end, you will get to something good. And I think The Outlaw Varjack Paw is a good title for that book. Phoenix? No. Phoenix was not always called Phoenix. It went through loads of different titles. That was one of the last things I figured out about this book. In the final year of writing Phoenix, I realised the book was called Phoenix, but that really took me forever. With Tyger, yeah, it goes right back to the beginning. Just like Varjack Paw, Tyger was always called Tyger because there was always this being called Tyger at the heart of it. So it's been different with each book. Sometimes it's there at the start, sometimes you have to work for it. In both cases, you just have to keep going as long as it takes until it is the very best that you can make it, like anything else in writing. Okay, I think we have maybe about 5 minutes to go. So I'm going to press on and try and answer as many questions as I possibly can. This is from De La Salle School in St. Helens. We know Tyger took you 9 years to write. For anybody else out there who doesn't know that, yes, Tyger did take me 9 years to write. I thought 5 years was a long time to spend writing Varjack Paw. And of course, it is a long time to spend on one book. 9 years. But totally worth it, because I really do believe that is my best book so far. So the question is, what is the longest time you have ever spent on writing a story? And thankfully, the answer to that is 9 years. Tyger is the longest I have spent so far writing a story. I really hope I don't have to spend more than 9 years writing my next book. I have been working on something new for the last couple of years, ever since I finished writing Tyger. I don't think it's going to take 9 years. I think this one is going to be a little bit quicker. At least I hope it is. But I know now it takes as long as it takes to make a story as good as you can possibly make it. And that is now my ambition with every book. I know if it takes me so long to write a book, I'm never going to write hundreds of books. I do have hundreds of ideas, but I'm only ever going to write a few books. But what I can do is make each and every book the very, very best it can be, so that whoever you are, whatever you might think you enjoy, you will find something to enjoy in my books. That is now my ambition. Quality rather than quantity. So if a book takes longer than 9 years, so be it. It will be worth it in the end. Okay, Wolf Fields Primary School would like to know, what is the hardest and the best part of being an author? What is the hardest and the best part of being an author? Okay, I think for me, and this will probably be different author to author, you could have 100 different authors answer this question in 100 different ways, but for me, I think the hardest part is when you've really put a lot of work into something, you've given it everything you've got, you think it's really, really good, and then you show it to your publisher, and your publisher says, I think you should do some more drafts, SF. This still happens to me, even now. Here I am, 4 books published. They've all won prizes, and my editor still says that to me. I think you should do another draft. And I often go, no, I can't, I've worked so hard. And he says, no, remember, with Varjak Paw, you only found the 2 black hats right at the end, and what would the book be without them? Of course, he's absolutely right. In Tyger, I think my favourite thing in the whole book, the very first pages you will read on page 1, very first words you'll read on page 1. It happened in the 21st century, when London was still the capital of an empire, and the empire still ruled the world. Those were literally the very last words I wrote in the book. And they are, I think, my favourite thing in the book. So he is always right. You have to keep going. And you do know when it's done. There's no question about it at all. You look at it and you think, yep, that is the very best that I can make it. The best part of being an author, for me, if anybody ever says to me, oh, I read your book, I really enjoyed it, that is the best part of being an author. It makes all that hard work more than worthwhile. You cannot imagine, you really cannot imagine, just how inspiring it is for a writer to hear that somebody has enjoyed their book. So if anybody out there has enjoyed one of my books, thank you so much. It's an amazing, amazing thing. And if you are going to go on and read one of my books, let me know. Writers love to hear that people have read and enjoyed their books. I think we might have time for one last question. This is from John Burns, Primary School. And the question is, do you enjoy your career? You might think, after everything I've said today about how long it takes me to write each book and how difficult I find writing, you might think my answer would be no. And I cannot pretend it's always fun. But yes, I love it. I love writing. It's my favourite thing. Yes, it can be hard work, but if you really want your story to be the very best story, the one that you would most want to read, if you could have any story at all, there is no other way to do it. So anybody out there interested in writing, there's a load of tips on my website. You can just Google that. There's loads on the BookTrust website as well. I'd encourage you to have a look at that. But try and write the story you want to read and make it as good as you would want it to be as a reader. You will enjoy that. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. It has been a complete pleasure and a privilege talking to you all. Happy reading, happy writing, and good luck with absolutely everything that you do. Thank you so much.